Hello, folks. I'm Jim. He's Alex. And today we've got our first ever guest on the podcast. And it's the illustrious Mr. James Batchelor. Say hello, James.
Hello, Jim. You you didn't tell me I was your first ever guest. I mean,
First
I
ever.
would have I've done some prep if I'd known that.
No, we wanted
So
we wanted to set the bar high. So we've gone straight in with the,
well,
the man that's done it all.
I'm very flattered that you think I'm a high bar, but we'll return to that at the end of this podcast, shall we?
So, so you're one of few in this particular space that's done both at a reasonable level. There are lots of us on video that once wrote an article for the I don't know, whichever generic car blog du jour, and lots of journos that have absolutely go into a state of panic if someone points a camera in their face. So how does that sit with you, and which do you prefer?
No, it sits with me very comfortably. I am aware of the fact I probably, and this sounds very arrogant, and I don't mean it to be at all, but I probably was one of the, not one of the first, but one of the early kind of journalists who was thrust in front of a camera and told, you've just got to present a video. And the thing is, and I don't think it's any different now, when I started, I was given no training whatsoever. It just was, oh, you seem to be quite a charismatic person, and we desperately need some video content. So here you are, here's a car, and we want a 15-minute video about it, and go ahead. And when I say no training, I mean not just in terms of presenter training, but also training in terms of how to deal with all of the comments that are thrown at you, and I was never sort of prepared for that and prepped for it, which I think is a bit of a mistake, really. I think you need to have a bit of kind of I think somebody needs to sit you down and say, look, don't take any of this personally. And I was never told that. So it took a long time to grow a thick skin for people on the internet basically saying what they want to say about you to you. So, yeah.
Yeah,
I don't quite know
yeah.
whether I've answered your question there, but there we are.
It's interesting though, isn't it? Because it is a completely different skill set, really. I mean,
Yeah.
you've got all the time in the world, in theory, when you're writing an article, but when you're in front of the camera, particularly as I guess most of the time you've had a crew with you and stuff, and time is money and all that.
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously when you write a car review, you're obviously mindful of your audience, but you do know that you can explain things in great detail should you need
Mm.
to.
Yeah,
Whereas as both of you know, on camera, you've got a finite amount of time to grab somebody's attention. And I've always pitched my videos, whether it was for Auto Express or CarBuyer or now, my channel and sometimes electrifying and what have you. My audience has always been fairly top level. So you just need to give a bit of information. You can't go into huge amounts of information because you would just bore people to tears, and there are some people who do that very well, not bore people to tears, but
yeah.
talk about very technical stuff in a very good way. And I'm not that kind of person at all.
Same here. Yeah,
Yeah, there's
very much
definitely an
so.
audience for that kind of long form. I mean, there's videos out there that could be up to an hour long
Yes.
of a car, and they are appealing to a certain subset of people. But I
Yeah.
think me and Jim try and keep our videos when we make them, I don't know, 10, 20 minutes sort of thing. They seem to a good length, really. So yeah.
And what was CarBuyer the first time you went in front of the camera, or had you done Auto Express prior to that?
I first started out on Car Dealer magazine at Black Ball Media, and I did do a bit of video there. But really, I mean, I was thrown. It was Auto Express, and I remember the day I turned up at Auto Express, and absolutely, I was really scared because it is that imposter syndrome which we all suffer from. But I really did feel as though I'd come from a magazine that was a business magazine, obviously for car dealers, hence the name. And then all of a sudden I'm on Britain's, most popular weekly car magazine, and I turned up as news editor. So I was in charge of a news desk of journalists, and I was like, I'm the same age as all of you, and but I'm now news editor. And I turned up and I was thrown straight into a news meeting because it was a Wednesday afternoon, and the news meeting at Auto Express is on a Wednesday afternoon, and I remember Steve Fowler just looking at me and saying, okay, we've got 10 pages of news, 5 spreads of news here. What are we going to be doing? And I was like, I literally have turned up 2 hours ago. I've got no idea, Steve. I don't know. Anyway, and then so I did that for a bit. And then I remember going my first car launch for Auto Express, and I was told to take a video camera with me. And I shot a video. And then from then onwards, I was doing video all the time at Auto Express. Then Matt Watson left to go to CarWow, and we don't need to talk about that, but he went off to Car. And everybody at the time thought, what on earth are you doing? Why on earth are you going to CarWow? And I was promptly brought into the office of the publishing director and said, you can string a sentence together in front of a camera. You are now going to be doing all of CarBuyer's videos. And I was like, oh my God, this is serious. And taking over from somebody like Matt Watson, I mean, it was horrendous. It really was. I mean, the first video I did for CarBuyer was, I should have started off lightly with like the Hyundai i10 facelift or something, or the new diesel engine in the Kia Rio. And I didn't. I thought, right, I'm here. And I was a bit arrogant. I was like, I'm here and I'm going to do a video about the new Ford Mustang. It just come into the UK in right-hand drive. This is late 2015. And we did the video and we put it out on the 27th of December. And I remember that because, of course, we're all off for Christmas. And I was reading all the comments thinking, oh, hopefully I've made a great impression on the CarBuyer audience. And it had genuinely like 1,000 downvotes. The comment section was, what the hell is this? Who is this? Where's Matt? Hashtag where's Matt? That became a hashtag for quite a while. Where's Matt? Jeez. And I genuinely thought that over that 2 weeks of Christmas that I'd come back on, in January, and I'd be sacked because, the audience hated me. And luckily I wasn't. And then I did 5 years of doing CarBuyer videos with Ginny Buckley as well. And had an absolute whale of a time. It was great. And that was all about creating your own style. Because up until that point, I didn't really have a style. I just sort of mumbled out your words. And Ginny was a great coach. She really did mentor me in terms of presenting. And I think by the end of it, I think we were sort of the automotive's equivalent of Kirsty and Phil. There was a nice kind of chemistry between us, which I really enjoyed, and I miss that greatly, actually.
Yeah, I think the audience felt that as well. I certainly did, and I think there's just always this fear of change from people, or just a disgust for change sometimes, and probably as a first car, as you've just said, it's going to be a bit of a knob magnet.
Yes.
That kind of video. I think that's the word for it. The word of the day. There you go. There's the episode title, knob magnet.
There we go. Sorted.
And a picture of me. Of me. Yeah.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah.
Thanks.
But yeah, I think as people just need to get used to you, don't they? In a different style, I guess.
No, yeah. Well, yes, and and the internet is so predictable, because when I stopped doing CarBuyer, and then I think Richard Ingram took over and a few other people, there were comments saying, "Oh, where's Batch gone?" or "Where's Batch and Ginny?" And it was like, but 5 years ago you absolutely hated my guts, but it is that change, and particularly when you're working, and this is an interesting thing. So now I've got my own channel, and it's pretty dreadful, and and I'm terrible at working with the YouTube algorithm, as we all are, but me in particular. But I tend to find now that the people who watch my videos, or people who leave comments, let's put it, that's a better way of putting it, I rarely get negative comments now, because I've been doing it long enough, and the audience have sort of followed me from CarBuyer to my own channel. So most comments are quite positive. But when I was at CarBuyer and also, of course, you are you're a presenter on a title, and people tend to sort of abuse and critique the title. So you can always hide behind that magazine title. Whereas when you're doing it by yourself, as a pair of it is you, and it is all about you. And I tend to find people a little bit more. They're a bit nicer, actually. I tend to find, because they know they're talking to you. So
do you know how I measure if a video is successful before I look at any of the numbers? I go to the comments, and if I see loads of really horrible comments, I know it's gone out to a massive audience, like for the first time, and you've suddenly got all these fresh eyes on you, and it would be like, you patchy head this, and you fat whatever, and or people suggesting you've been paid to make something or whatever it may be. But I said to Alex before, I said, when you start getting insulted, your channel's doing well.
Yeah,
it's really sad, but it's very true.
Yeah, it's been pushed to a new section of the audience. So
yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah. Unlike now, where they've just completely screwed it for everyone, and they don't even show you videos to your subscribers. So, which is a new phenomenon.
Well, you said something interesting there, Jim, and it might be worth just picking up on how sometimes you might get a comment saying you've been paid to say this. Well, I don't. I've had that recently on a particular video where I really did rip this car apart, and a few people said you've been paid to say that.
Right.
And I was quite like, well, no, I haven't been paid. I'm a journalist. I'm impartial. I never get paid. And if I am, I've done some paid for stuff, but that's been on different channels, and it's quite clearly said that it's paid for and what have you. But all the stuff that I do on my YouTube channel, none of it is paid for, and I get very little income from my channel, and that's not the point of it. But I think, I don't actually get angry at people when they say things like that, because there is so much content on YouTube, and the lines are completely blurred now, and it really does greatly upset me how some people can't work out the difference between what a journalist says and what a content creator says, and then what an influencer says. And as we all know, those three things are very, very different. But the lines are being blurred, and people can't work out the difference anymore.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. And yeah, there's just no understanding of that at all. And sometimes you say, there's this weird phenomenon as well with car reviews, particularly, not that I do loads of them, but when somebody watches, a lot of the people that watch, or certainly a lot of people that comment, already own the car.
I've noticed this,
and they're watching it for validation, and they'll come to you and say, I've had this car for 6 months, the best car I've ever had. Matt Watson said he liked this thing, and you said it's rubbish. Or influencer du jour said they love this about it, and this about it, and this about it. I'm like, well, the difference between me and that one is he's been paid to say nice.
Yeah, but most of the time, people want validation, and I still get it now. But particularly when I was working on those big titles, people would message you on Instagram and say, "Oh, hi, I've always watched your videos. I'm currently thinking about buying a Fiesta, and I'm also thinking about buying a Clio. Which one should I go for?" And people come to you for car advice, and I'm sure you get the same thing. And I'd always go back, and I still do. I always go back and say, "Well, which one do you like?" And they'll say, "Well, I like the Fiesta." And I said, "Well, buy the Fiesta then." They just want that validation.
Yeah,
right.
That they're making the right choice. Yeah.
So what does work look like for you at the moment then, Batch? You've obviously got Car Dealer Magazine and your electrifying work. Tell us about it.
Yes, so my YouTube stuff very much is just when I can be asked, basically, and when I'm in the mood. Because as we all know, you've got to be in the mood to do YouTube, haven't you? But anyway, so that's just one thing that I do. But I do have a full diary of journalist stuff. So, I'm part-time at Black Ball Media, so I'm predominantly working on Car Dealer magazine, which is where I started, which is very interesting because the motor trade really has changed a huge amount in the time that I've been away from it. You know, what with agency sales and electric cars and all that kind of stuff. But because it's Black Ball Media, we we do all the press association stuff. So press association is a syndication feed, basically. So you write something and then it's syndicated out to all the nationals. You know, the Mirror, Daily Star, all the Reach newspapers, and lots of local newspapers. So that's quite exciting. Writing on a national level again. So that's that. I also do quite a bit of electrifying stuff, which again, you know, is totally different because you are writing for quite a mixed audience. You're writing for electric car owners and people who have been fanatical about electric cars the past 15 years. And also you're writing to people who have never experienced electric cars before. So you really do have to really explain stuff. And I'm sure you two have found this, you know, driving and reviewing electric cars. You have to sort of take your old brain out, don't you? And you have to put in a new brain, because all of this stuff's new to us as well, which is the, you know, exciting, but also quite terrifying thing, isn't it? So there's that. And then I've got numerous other freelance activities, one of which is I'm a Tow Car of the Year judge. I don't quite know how I ended up doing this, but I write reviews for the Caravan and Motorhome Club. So again, that's an entirely different audience, you know, who have got certain requirements from a car, who predominantly are anti-EV. So you have to sort of deal with that. And then, yes, various other freelance stuff, writing copy for nationals and smaller publications and what have you. So, yes, I have a very busy sort of diary of stuff, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I think I absolutely love what I do at the moment.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think variation is how I manage to keep going, even though it's all on my channel. Just putting varied content out, I just could. I think if I just did one, I couldn't just do car reviews. I'd find it impossible. And I think just to mix it up, I don't know. It keeps it a bit fresher, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting what you said about tailoring the content to new drivers, because one thing I've tried to do with the EV reviews now is I mention in every video that the CCS2 port, it's got 2 sections to it. I try and mention that because I came across someone a while back that didn't know how to use it. So I try and make that. It seems a bit pointless every time, but I try and mention that in every review.
I think that's good. I think that's a good idea, because you've got to, you know, I would imagine. I mean, it's the same for me. I would presume it's the same for you. That the vast majority of people watching your videos, obviously it changes between video and video, but predominantly you want to appeal to people, the biggest audience, and the biggest audience is non-EV buyers at the moment. And so you do have to try and explain this technology and not just assume that everybody knows what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So on that front, and particularly like with obviously you know more about this than anyone with your Car Dealer magazine work, the kind of ZEV mandate. Do you feel, I do, but do you feel that it's had this perverse kind of reverse effect where it's actually put people off even contemplating an EV simply because they feel like, you know, Big John government is telling them they must?
No, 100%. 100%. And it's a very British thing, this, isn't it? We don't like to be told what to do. And I've explained this to people until I'm blue in the face, that from 2035 onwards, you will still be able to drive a petrol or a diesel car. But people have got it into their head that they are being forced to buy an electric car. Now, to a certain extent, from 2035 onwards, if you want to buy a brand new car, you will be forced to buy an EV. But it's wrapped up in this whole narrative that the government is forcing you to do something. And we saw this during COVID, didn't we? Of this whole thing of the government has locked down. You know, we can't go out of our houses. We've got to have these jabs. We've got to do this. We've got to do that. And it's and particularly with electric cars, because it's such a divisive subject, and it shouldn't be, but it's become a divisive topic. people naturally are very anti towards it. And it's a shame because, as we know, it's not a one size fits all kind of technology, but there are some tremendous benefits to electric cars, and yet it's quite often they are completely stamped out by a lot of people who want to shout, saying, "I'm not going to be driving." I had it today, actually. I'm not going to be driving a milk float. You know, I don't care what the government tells me. I'm not going to drive one. And it's like, oh my God. It's like,
yeah. I think as well, like people always say it's the diehard, the petrol heads, the car fans, blah, blah, blah. Petrol head meaning someone that loves cars rather than petrol, I would assume.
I hope so.
Or it used to be in any case. But really, I've always been obsessed with cars, like since my oldest memories were messing about with cars and things. And I don't think it's ever been a more interesting time since probably, you know, the horse and cart went out and you stopped having to have a runner in front of the car with a flag. It really is a super interesting time. And whilst not everyone's going to be interested in a Nissan Leaf, you know, there's a bit of everything now, and it keeps evolving. And I think probably in the next 2 years, we're going to see that next stage of evolution with different batteries. And I just think it's such an exciting time. Although, and for on the petrol side of things, I think it's the most boring time it's been for a long time, because people have taken out these wonderful 2-litre power plants and put in a 3-pot with a big turbo that's a bit.
No, it is, and it really. I keep reminding myself of this. It really is a fascinating time, and I mean, let's be perfectly honest. Yes, cars have changed a little bit over the last 10 years. There's more technology, more screens, but fundamentally, you know, I'm not saying anything groundbreaking here, but fundamentally, the car has remained the same for at least the last 50 years, at the very least, and probably even more than that. And whereas in the last, particularly in the last 5 years, you could stretch it to 10 years, I suppose. It really is an absolutely fascinating place to be. It's a fascinating, and I do feel, I know this sounds a bit ridiculous, but I do feel quite privileged that I am able to work in an industry that, you know, it's undergoing a huge amount of change. And like I said earlier on, we're having to grapple with that change. It's not just the consumer. We're all trying to work out, you know, what does this mean, and what does that mean, and and we, let's be honest, we don't really know what the future is. We are told by the government 2035 is you know, that is the date that we are going to, you know, ICE cars are going to go off sale. But I wouldn't be surprised if that's changed again. It's been changed umpteen times already. I wouldn't be surprised if it gets changed again. So we don't know what the future is, and we don't know whether it's going to be a pure electric future. We don't know whether it's going to be, you know, here we go again. But is there going to be hydrogen? Is there going to be this? Is there going to be, you know, sustainable fuels and e-fuels and all this kind of stuff? So it's a fascinating time to be in this business, because I do remember when I started off at Auto Express, at that time, it was incredibly boring because, you know, this was just before Dieselgate. You would only recommend somebody to buy a 2-litre TDI of a car. That's all you'd say. You'd never recommend, you know, 3 Series BMW. You'd rarely say to somebody, oh, yes, go and buy the 320i, the petrol, or the 316 with that tiny little 3-cylinder petrol engine. It was always the 320d, because why wouldn't you? Beautiful to drive, and it did 70 mpg. And you'd always recommend that engine choice. Whereas now, there's all these kind of different cars and different power sources, and it really is an interesting place to be. Yeah.
Me and Jim were talking a few episodes ago about some people complain about all the brands entering the market, but that makes it incredibly interesting because we always want to look at something that's different. Like when you go to a different country, it's all the different food, but now we've got all these different brands coming to this country. It's really quite exciting and interesting. It's fab. Yeah,
no, it is, and I was with Auto Trader recently, and I can't remember the precise numbers, but it's something like, you know, like 2 years ago there were sort of like 39 or 40 brands in the UK. By the end of this year, or I think it's at the end of this year, it could be 65. You know, and that they are all Chinese brands that are coming in. Now, that's not to say that we're still going to have 65 brands at the beginning of next year, because as we know, some will disappear. You know, there are some brands like Neo who have been saying they're going to be coming to the UK for ages, and they're still not here. So, you know, there is going to be some are going to arrive and some are going to disappear. But it really is a fascinating time. And I'm sure, like you know, I'm also having to do a huge sort of learning process. We've all grown up with a certain hierarchy in terms of brands. We know that Ford, Vauxhall, Renault and Nissan are the volume kind of brands, and Audi, Volvo, BMW and Mercedes are the premium ones. And then we know the pecking order, and so does the consumer. Everybody knows that they prefer to have a BMW over a Ford. Goodness only knows why, but some, you know, they do, you know. Whereas now all these new brands are coming in and totally, you know, throwing all of this up in the air. And it's going to be interesting to see where it all lands, really. And I think we're not just going to have casualties in terms of the Chinese brands, but we are going to have some casualties in terms of the legacy brands. I mean, look at the likes of Jaguar, you know, and I'm a massive Jaguar fan. And what's happening at the moment is, you know, it really does upset me. And I hate to say this, but I don't think that brand's going to be around in 5 years' time. If it will be around, I think the Chinese will own it. So I think we are going to see a huge convergence of brands, and some brands are going to disappear, and some of them are going to be brands that you would have thought, yes, they may have 130 years of history and legacy, but that doesn't mean that doesn't guarantee their future in the next 50 years.
It's funny that you mentioned Jag, because a friend of mine asked me about it about a week ago, and I said to him, I think in 5 years, Jaguar are more likely to be selling watches than they are to be selling cars.
Yeah, or fragrances.
And
yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Or really expensive handbags.
But I really do think the Chinese are going to buy it. And you know, I'm prepared to be wrong, and I hope I am wrong, because Tata have done an amazing job with Jaguar to a certain extent. And I think the Chinese, as they've shown with MG, they just want the name, and they can leverage that heritage when they want to, but they just want it for the name. I mean, MG is a very interesting case in point, isn't it? Because that brand is very different from how we traditionally have viewed, particularly in Britain, how we traditionally view MG. And over the last 10 years, you could say, well, 10, 15 years, they have not been building the kinds of cars which we typically remember. But then all of a sudden, it's like somebody in China has remembered, oh, it's 100 years of MG. And then that's why they did good with Festival Speed last year. And then they can turn on the interest in terms of heritage when it suits them. But really, they're not interested in heritage at all, because they're a Chinese company that just wants to sell cars in vast volumes.
They've done,
but what can he move to buy that brand, particularly in this country? Because I think it's just so much more palatable for so many Brits, particularly when it's a brand they're somewhat familiar with, even though it's completely and utterly different. It's not Xpeng, you know, which is, oh, this is jarring, this is new. The one I often talk about is Genesis, you know. Obviously it's Hyundai, and they've done massively well in other markets, but here I don't think they sell enough, simply because people haven't seen a Genesis before. And they've got some fantastic cars, but it's something new. Where
it's because we're snobs. We are a nation of snobs, and you know, journalists. You know, the way of introducing Genesis, and I'm not criticizing myself and my profession and the industry that we all work in, but you know, to try and explain something and where it sits in the market, you inevitably refer to Hyundai, don't you? And the same with Infinity, you know, 15 years ago, you know, it's an offshoot of Nissan. And of course, the famous example is Lexus, isn't it? You know, and so you've got to refer to that when you're describing the company. But then they're saying, well, why does that Genesis cost £15,000 more than the equivalent Hyundai when it is a Hyundai? You know, whereas with MG, it's totally different. They came in through the back door by buying this brand, but their cars were such good value for money that people just they were just focused on the price. The brands didn't, and brand snobbery and associations and aspirations didn't come into it, because they know they're getting a ZS EV for £180 a month on lease, for example. It doesn't come into it anymore.
I'd be willing to bet with MG that there's a certain amount of the market where they don't even realise it, that it is Chinese. They probably just think, "Oh, MG's back," and then that's it. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's my assumption, but yeah.
Yeah, but particularly when SAIC bought the brand, they for a very short period of time they were still building cars. I say building in the loosest sense, but they were building cars at Longbridge. People did think, oh, they're building cars in Britain, it's a British badge, it's a British car company. And then, very quietly they wound down Longbridge. But that association is still in people's minds, that it's, they're probably their grandfather, their father had an MGB or an MG Maestro or whatever, and people still associate it with it as a British brand. I'd say it's clever. It's not clever at all. But it's two very different ways, SAIC have done that, and then you've got at the moment, Xiaopeng and and Xpeng and all these brands that are coming in with typically Chinese names, and there is some I do detect there is a bit of reluctance from British buyers towards not BYD is different. BYD is just 3 letters, but with those very Chinese names, I do detect a slight reservation from people to go for them.
Particularly the I think Yang Wang may struggle here, and possibly in the US. And what was the other? Dongfeng.
BYD have got Fang Cheng Bao, Yang Wang, and Denza. So it's those 3. Yeah,
but you look at
where Austin would be more palatable.
Yeah, but you look at GWM. I remember talking to them years ago when they said. I mean, I remember this. I even talked to them 15 years ago when they first turned up in the UK, and they were called Great Wall Motor. And they turned up with that dreadful Steed pickup. But I remember talking to the management at the time, and they showed of all these pictures, and I drove a few prototypes. There was like this Toyota Yaris copy, there was a saloon car, there was a coupe, there was all this kind of stuff, and it never materialized. And then 15 years later they're back, part of IM Group, who do Subaru and what have you, and they launched with quite a great fanfare, with the funky cat. And then that didn't really go anywhere. Then they rebadged it, and then they've said that they're going to be bringing this saloon car for yonks. They've been saying that for the past 4 years, and it still isn't here. And then now they've brought Haval, haven't they? Haval, Haval, I don't know. They've brought that along, the Julian or whatever it's called, and then now they want to bring another brand to the UK. And it's like. It's just not going to work. It's just not going to work.
That Julian's known as Jules to his friends, though.
It's such a friendly name, isn't it, Julian? I drive a Julian. It's not called that.
It's disarming.
Oh dear.
We've gone on to a right tangent there, haven't we?
Should we touch on the BYD Dolphin Surf that me and you drove a few days ago?
I think we should.
So me and Jim went down to northeast London, I think, amongst all the nation's influencers. So we fitted in very, very well. And to drive the brand new BYD Dolphin Surf, which is a car that sits in between. It's slightly bigger than a VW Up, but I was dead impressed with that. I don't know what you thought, Jim, but I was really, really impressed.
Yeah, so my initial impressions were good, but I only had initial impressions because I had the car for maybe 20 minutes and had 2 other people in the car, who were brilliant, by the way. So, thanks to those guys for keeping me laughing through it. But yeah, it's very good. In that very, very brief time I had with it, you have to compare it to the Insta, which I drove a few weeks ago, that I absolutely adored. and didn't expect to
Yeah.
at all. I don't particularly like the styling of it. It's definitely not aimed at my demographic, I would say. And I drove it and thought it was magnificent and a real laugh. And I came away thinking, oh, I wouldn't mind one of those. And I then very briefly, because Renault don't seem to like me, I don't know, drove for the first time the Renault 5 at Millbrook the other week. And I adore the look of that car. Absolutely adore it. I love that sort of retro modern styling. I wish everyone had done that with everything ever, because all the cars would be more interesting.
Yeah, bring that back. Yes.
Yeah, 100%. Austin Maestro, come on. There's that big broad brush generalism that I'm not known for. But I drove that and I thought it was good, but it didn't particularly. It was just seemed like a nice enough car. I spent 10-15 minutes with it, but it didn't blow me away. And I got the same feeling with the Dolphin Surf. I just thought it seemed like a very good, sensible mode of transport, and it seems reasonably well priced. And you had lots of legroom in the back for a small car, and it was fairly well spec'd. But it didn't blow me away in the same way that the Insta did. But I did spend 5 hours with the Insta.
My biggest takeaway from the Dolphin Surf was the build quality. I was really, really impressed with just the fit and finish on it. I know it's
So mine had a rattle underneath the headlining. Yeah. Which, and you could feel it because the headline is not particularly thick. And it was a group of cables, possibly a junction box or something that obviously come unstuck. And it did have 300 miles on the clock though. So.
No, I haven't driven it. I haven't driven it yet. But I do wonder how much of this is BYD making hay while the sun shines. Because I think if Renault do get their act together and they do build the Twingo and turn it around pretty sharpish, which we're led to believe they will do, I think that will be the city car of choice for people. I think, but of course, as we know, it all comes down to pricing, doesn't it? And because the three of us, as much as we try to be rational and down to earth, we are car people, and like you said, Jim, we do try to be blown away with stuff, don't we? But the typical car buyer doesn't really care, and as long as it keeps them warm and it's costing them under £150 a month on the lease or £200 on the PCP or whatever, they don't really care, do they?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that's a fantastic point. That Twingo does look amazing.
Yeah, and also things like the ID2. If VW ever get round, I think we'll still be here in 5 years' time, and we're still going to be talking about the imminent arrival of the ID2. But that's another one, isn't it?
Do you know, of all the brands that I don't have sort of a relationship with at the moment, Renault is the one. So there are so many cars now that they're producing that are interesting and different, and the future looks so good. But I guess, I guess it's a bit of a feeding frenzy, especially from nobodies like me. So yeah,
I feel quite awkward. I don't know what to say.
Anyone? Come on. But it does look really, really interesting, and I think that could be the one that kind of tips the balance, maybe. There's also that ridiculous new Renault 5 that's like £200,000 or something.
Just to return to the Surf, just very, very quickly. Do you think it's going to be really popular? Because at the moment, let's face it, Dacia is not selling many Springs. You can get a Spring on a £111 lease deal at the moment. I don't think Leapmotor is doing particularly well with the T03. And I think, as much as we journalists and people in the car industry have all been calling for cheaper, more value-orientated electric cars, I've yet to see proof that customers are going out in hordes and buying these cheap electric cars. They are more interested in getting a used Vauxhall Corsa or a Renault Zoe, or I saw the other day at VW ID3 they're now creeping into the sub £10,000 bracket. I think people are more interested in those used cars, particularly as we know that used, as soon as you buy a brand new electric car, the depreciation on them is absolutely shocking. I mean, in some cars it is gopingly bad, eye-wateringly awful. So why not just buy a used electric car that's already gone through that huge depreciation curve? So
absolutely. I mean, and I think that's the big challenge at the moment, that where what happens is, at the moment there are all these amazing lease deals, but at some point the lease companies are going to say this is completely unsustainable, we can't do it anymore. And what happens at that point? So at the moment it's a no-brainer. If you want a new one, lease it, or buy a second-hand one. Buy a 3-year-old bargain. But if you want a new one, surely you just lease it.
The other thing I think I mentioned this to you before, Jim, is this comes down to like a fundamental like technology problem. But if you buy, so I've got my Up. If there's not any difference in terms of technology, you compare that to like a 50 grand luxury car, for example. You can fill them up both. I know this sort of goes against the idea of the podcast, but you can both fill them up just as quickly as each other, right? Whereas in a cheaper electric car, there's compromises. You either have to have a smaller battery or a slower charging speed, and that doesn't make them useful for everything. I think that's the big problem with some of them, is that they are a tech product at the end of the day, and there have to be some compromises with that.
That is a very good point. That's a very good point. I hadn't thought of that before, but you are absolutely spot on. The compromises are greater when it comes to cheap electric cars, aren't they?
Yeah, the Dolphin Surf on paper seems a bit better than the Spring and the T03 because it can charge at 85 kilowatt or whatever it is on the more expensive version. And BYD have put their Blade battery in, so it's a bit more compact. But yeah, at the moment, those cheaper EVs have a bit more compromise. You might think, oh, why not just spend a couple grand more or get a used whatever it is, and you can travel 300 something miles. So yeah,
which is why I think the Twingo could be the winner here, because I think people may, if you fall in love with the styling or you remember the 90s original, you will potentially put up with some of those compromises, whereas something like the T03, which in effect is an old car, it's been on sale in China for yonks, and we've only just got it. So I think the Surf is a big step up. Not that I've driven it, but from a tech perspective, I think it's a big step up from the T03 and the Spring. But I think if people are going to buy a cheap EV with their own money, I think character does come into it, and I think the Twingo might steal a march on those three.
And I've said on this podcast a few times now, once the Honda E hits a certain price point, I'm buying one. So, and that's a very compromised EV, very, very compromised. So, but it's got character.
Just before we wrap things up, I just want to say a massive thanks to our guest James Batchelor, not only for coming along today, but actually for being a bloody good bloke. And when I sort of turned up at I think probably my first drive day with the manufacturer.
Was that a VW one?
That was VW, yeah. And you get lots of stairs and stuff, and you walk into the room as the new bloke, and it's a bit like that. And you certainly took some time and said hello, and you've done that other times as well. And a lot of people don't, and it really is massively appreciated. When I turn up at those things, even now I've done lots of them, but the imposter syndrome kicks in a big way. Never more so than when Vicky Butler-Henderson sits next to you during a presentation, by the way. At that point, I'm just a dribbling mess and I can't speak for the rest of the day.
But yeah, we all are.
She's on the telly. And Ginny as well is always absolutely so lovely. So yeah, just want to say thanks for not being a
knob magnet.
Easy knob magnet. Yeah. Extremely kind. That is extremely kind of you. But in my head, you've got every right to be there as I have. So we all like cars. So why not just all get along? I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, knob magnet. I think I'm going to write that down. Actually, I might use that in some copy.
There you go.
There we are. Okay.
But yeah, thanks for joining us. Where can people find you in either print or video if they want to find out more about you and what you do?
All over the place, really. I mean, this sounds really arrogant, but just put my name into Google, and then if you're really desperate to read something that I've written, then just read it there. And then, of course, YouTube. Always grateful for a subscribe. And that's Batch Reviews on YouTube. So
Sweet. They can see you and your trousers on that channel.
yeah, you've really not sold it to people there. Thanks, Alex.
Amazing. Me and Jim do this podcast every week. If you're new to this podcast, so car news, EV news, and all that sort of good stuff. Give us a subscribe on Apple Podcasts and also in video on YouTube. It really does go a long way. Thanks for your time, James and Jim, and we'll see you again next time.
Have you gone for a navy trouser to match your wall, by the way?